The invitation arrived 16 years after they buried the lie. Heavy cream paper, black ink, a coastal estate none of them had visited since they were 17. At the top was the bride's name, Cora Bell. Underneath it was the name of the man she intended to marry, Julian Cross. Nina read it 3 times before calling the others. Tess thought it was a joke. Amelia thought it was a threat. Lydia said nothing for so long that Nina asked whether the call had dropped. It had not. All 4 women remembered Julian Cross. They remembered choosing his birthday, his favourite songs, the scar beneath his left eye, and the photographs they stole from the internet. They remembered the messages he sent Cora, the promises, the private jokes, the confession of love. Julian Cross had been the perfect boy, because he had been designed by 4 girls who knew exactly what Cora wanted to hear. He had never existed, and yet, 16 years later, Cora was asking them to watch her marry him. Part 1. The Boy They Built. At 17, cruelty did not feel permanent. It felt like something that happened between classes. A comment whispered over lunch, a photograph passed beneath a desk. A secret opened only long enough for everyone to laugh. Cora Bell entered their school halfway through the year. Her mother had died the previous autumn, and her father had moved them to the coast because he believed grief could be outrun if the scenery changed. Cora was quiet without being shy. That distinction irritated Lydia. Shy people wanted permission to enter a room. Cora entered without asking and then behaved as if she did not care whether anyone noticed. She read during lunch. She wore her mother's old coats. She answered teachers with the confidence of someone who had already survived a greater embarrassment than school could provide. Nina was the first to speak to her. Tess was the first to like her. Amelia was the first to invite her somewhere. Lydia was the first to understand what Cora wanted. Not popularity, not attention, certainty. Cora wanted to know that when someone said they cared about her, they would still exist the following morning. Julian Cross began as a joke. They found photographs of a young man on an old travel blog. Dark hair, a half-smile, a pale mark beneath his left eye. Lydia created the profile. Nina chose the music. Amelia wrote the first message. Tess objected for almost 20 minutes before helping them make Julian sound more intelligent. They sent Cora a friend request. She accepted. For 2 weeks, Julian remained casual, then attentive, then indispensable. He asked about Cora's mother without making her grief sound fragile. He remembered the anniversary of her death. He sent photographs of rainy streets and said they reminded him of the way Cora described sadness. The girls expected Cora to become ridiculous. Instead, she became happier. She spoke more. She stopped eating lunch alone. She started writing again. That should have ended the prank. It did not, because making Cora believe in Julian had given the 4 girls something more intoxicating than laughter. It gave them access. Every private fear Cora shared with him became something they could read together. Every confession became entertainment. Every vulnerable sentence belonged to the group before Cora had finished typing it. Then Julian told her he loved her. No one remembered who wrote the words. Years later, each woman would quietly believe it had been someone else. Part 2. The Invitation. The wedding was scheduled for 3 days in October at Bellwether House, a restored estate overlooking the same coast where they had grown up. Cora had rented the entire property. No social media, no additional guests, no partners. The invitation instructed each woman to come alone. Nina nearly declined. She had a husband, 2 children, and a life constructed around never explaining who she had been at 17. Tess accepted immediately. She said they owed Cora the chance to say whatever she had waited 16 years to say. Amelia accepted, because she believed refusing would look like fear. Lydia accepted, without offering a reason. They arrived separately on a Thursday afternoon. Cora was not waiting for them. A house manager named Mara showed them to their rooms and explained that the bride would join them at dinner. No one asked about the groom, not at first. His name appeared everywhere, on the menus, on the place cards, on a silver frame beside the guest book, Cora and Julian. But there were no photographs of the couple, and only photographs of Cora. Cora walking through Rome, Cora beside a lake in winter, Cora laughing in a kitchen none of them recognized. In every picture, the space beside her had been carefully cropped away. At 7, the women gathered in the dining room. 5 places had been set, 4 for them, 1 for Cora, no seat for Julian. Cora entered 6 minutes late. Nina recognized her instantly, though nearly everything had changed. Her hair was shorter, her face was thinner. The girl who once seemed indifferent to being watched had become a woman who controlled exactly where everyone looked. She embraced Tess. She kissed Nina's cheek. She acknowledged Amelia with a nod. When she reached Lydia, she stopped. For 1 second, something passed between them. Not surprise, recognition sharpened by history. Then Cora smiled. "You came." Lydia held her gaze. "You invited me." Cora sat at the head of the table. No one touched the wine. Nina spoke first. "Is Julian joining us?" Cora unfolded her napkin. "Eventually." Part 3. The first message. Dinner began with soup and silence. Cora asked about their lives with unsettling precision. She knew Nina's daughter had changed schools. She knew Tess had left her law firm. She knew Amelia was no longer engaged. When Amelia asked how she knew, Cora said Julian had always been good at finding things. The name changed the temperature of the room. Finally, Tess placed both hands on the table. "We owe you an apology." Cora looked at her. "For what?" The question sounded sincere. "That was worse," Tess continued. "For Julian." Cora smiled faintly. "You'll have to be more specific." Nina looked toward the door. Amelia stared at Cora as though the woman might suddenly admit the entire weekend was a prank. Lydia remained still. Cora lifted her glass. "To specificity." The dining room lights dimmed. A screen descended over the windows. The first message appeared. It was dated 16 years earlier. "Julian, tell me something you have never told anyone." Cora, "Sometimes I think my father blames me for surviving her." No one moved. The next message appeared. "Julian, then he is grieving badly. That is not the same as you being guilty." Cora watched the women rather than the screen. Nina remembered the night they read that exchange aloud in Lydia's bedroom. Amelia had laughed because Cora used the word surviving as if grief were a war. Tess had told them to stop. Lydia had said almost nothing. The screen changed again. A message none of them remembered appeared. "Julian, I know what it is like to be loved by someone who resents needing you." The date was 2 months after the prank ended. Tess leaned forward. "That wasn't us." Cora looked at her. "No." Nina felt something cold move through her. The girls had exposed Julian during the spring dance. They projected his messages behind the stage. They showed Cora the fake account. They let the school watch her discover that the person she loved had been assembled from stolen photographs and 4 bored girls. Cora left before the music resumed. The account was deleted that night. At least, that was what they had always believed. The message on the screen had been sent 8 weeks later. Someone had continued speaking to Cora as Julian. Part 4. 4 versions. Cora gave each woman an envelope. Inside was a printed conversation. Nina's began 3 months after the dance. Julian apologized to Cora. He claimed the girls had stolen his photographs and impersonated him, but insisted that he was real. He said he had only recently discovered what happened. Amelia's conversation began 6 months later. Julian described his childhood, a controlling father, a younger sister he had spent years protecting, a family that confused loyalty with obedience. Tess received a series of messages in which Cora demanded proof. Julian sent photographs never used on the original profile. He appeared older. He held a newspaper bearing that day's date. The scar beneath his eye was real. Lydia did not open her envelope. Cora noticed. "Don't you want to see what he told me?" "I know what he told you." Nina turned toward her. The room seemed to contract. Cora rested her elbows on the table. "Tell them." Lydia's face remained composed, but the colour had left it. She said the photographs belonged to her brother. His name was not Julian Cross. It was Gabriel Vale. He was 7 years older than Lydia and had left home at 19 after a violent argument with their father. The family rarely spoke about him. Lydia found his travel photographs online and used them to build Julian. Months after the prank, Gabriel discovered the account. He recognized his own face. He traced it back to Lydia. Then he read the messages, all of them. The jokes, the manipulations, the private grief Cora believed she had shared with someone who loved her. Gabriel contacted Cora. At first, he intended to explain. Then he did something Lydia still could not describe, without making it sound impossible. He became Julian. Not the boy they had invented. The person Cora had believed was hiding behind the lies. He answered her questions. He apologized for what the girls had done. He sent proof that he was real. And over the following year, he fell in love with her. Amelia laughed once, a small, disbelieving sound. "You're saying the groom is your brother?" Cora looked toward the empty chair at the far end of the table. "Yes." Part 5. The Man in the Photographs. The following morning, Cora showed them the uncropped photographs. Gabriel stood beside her in Rome, beside the winter lake. Inside the kitchen, he had the same half-smile from the profile, but age had changed its meaning. At 17, the expression looked careless. At 38, it looked guarded. In one photograph, Gabriel's hand rested against the back of Cora's neck. There was no performance in the gesture, no trace of Julian Cross. They had married 6 years earlier in a courthouse ceremony attended by 2 witnesses. This weekend was meant to be the wedding they had never held publicly. Nina asked where Gabriel was. Cora said he would arrive before the ceremony. Lydia walked out of the room. Tess found her near the cliffs. The wind pressed Lydia's coat against her body. She looked less like the woman they knew and more like the girl who had once decided which secrets were safe to tell. Tess asked whether she had known Gabriel stayed in contact with Cora. Lydia said yes, not immediately, but eventually. She found messages on an old device Gabriel had left at home. By then, he and Cora had been speaking for nearly a year. "Why didn't you stop him?" Tess asked. Lydia turned toward the water. "I tried." That afternoon, Amelia found a locked drawer in her room. Inside was an old phone. The Julian account was still open. The message history extended beyond anything Cora had shown them. There were hundreds of conversations, some tender, some furious, some written in a voice that did not sound like Gabriel. Amelia read until she found the date Gabriel had first contacted Cora. Then she noticed something impossible. Julian had sent Cora messages from two different locations within the same minute. One came from Gabriel. The other came from the old device in Lydia's house. For 9 months, two people had been speaking to Cora as Julian Cross, Gabriel, and Lydia. Part 6. Lydia's Julian. They confronted Lydia in the drawing room. Cora remained standing beside the fireplace. She did not appear surprised. Lydia looked at the old phone in Amelia's hand. Then she sat. The first message she sent as Julian after Gabriel took over had been small. Cora mentioned missing her mother. Lydia replied before Gabriel could. She told Cora that grief was love with nowhere to arrive. Cora answered immediately. So Lydia continued. She used Gabriel's identity in secret, sometimes for minutes, sometimes through entire nights. She learned when he was traveling and spoke to Cora during the hours he could not respond. She asked questions Gabriel would never have thought to ask. She remembered details because she had known Cora before he did. At first, Lydia told herself she was protecting her brother from a girl who might expose the family. Then she told herself she was correcting his mistakes. Eventually, she stopped pretending. Amelia stared at her. "You were in love with her." Lydia looked toward Cora. "I was 17. You were 23 when this continued." Lydia said nothing. Cora crossed the room slowly. She explained that for months she believed Julian was extraordinarily intuitive. He seemed to know her childhood memories before she had fully described them. He alternated between gentleness and distance. Some days he spoke like a man trying to earn forgiveness. Other days he spoke like someone already entitled to it. Cora believed she was seeing the complexity of one person. She was actually falling in love with two. When Gabriel finally told her the truth, Cora did not believe him. Then he showed her the duplicated messages, the login records, the device history. Lydia had not merely helped invent Julian, she had refused to let him belong entirely to anyone else. Nina asked why Cora invited them. Cora's answer was simple. Because you all believed the cruelty ended at the dance. The prank had been public. What followed had been private and far more intimate. Part 7. The Second Betrayal. The ceremony was scheduled for sunset. By late afternoon the weather had turned. Rain struck the windows in hard, slanting lines. The house manager brought the women to the chapel and asked them to take their seats. Cora wore no veil. Her dress was plain ivory silk. There were still only 5 chairs. No family and no witnesses, no musicians. Cora stood at the altar alone. The doors remained open behind her. Nina looked at the empty space where Gabriel should have been. "Where is he?" Cora glanced at Lydia. Lydia's expression changed before Cora spoke. "He isn't coming." The chapel remained silent, except for the rain. Cora said Gabriel had died 11 months earlier, a cerebral aneurysm, sudden, unpreventable. He collapsed in their kitchen while making coffee. For nearly a year, Cora had answered messages from people who continued inviting them to dinners, anniversaries, and family gatherings. Most did not know how to speak to her after learning he was gone. Lydia did. 3 weeks after Gabriel's funeral, Lydia sent Cora a message from the old Julian account. The first one in 12 years. "You still have me." Lydia closed her eyes. Cora continued. At first, she believed someone had hacked the account. Then another message arrived. "He was never the part of Julian you loved most." Tess looked at Lydia. "You contacted her after your brother died. Lydia opened her eyes. I wanted to explain. No, Cora said, you wanted to return. The messages continued for months. Lydia wrote as Julian again. She described memories only Cora and Gabriel knew. She offered comfort, then guilt, then a version of love constructed from grief and trespass. Cora never replied. But she preserved every message. The wedding invitation had been her first answer. Part 8. The Groom. Cora walked toward the empty chair at the end of the aisle. A small black box rested on the seat. She opened it. Inside was Gabriel's watch. Beneath it lay the original photograph Lydia had used to create Julian Cross. The edges were worn from years of handling. Cora held it toward the four women. You believed the worst thing you did was invent a man. She looked at Nina. At least you left the lie behind. Then Tess. You knew it was cruel and helped make it convincing. Then Amelia. You turned my grief into entertainment because everyone else was laughing. Finally, Lydia. But you could not accept that something false had become real without belonging to you. Lydia stood. I loved you. Cora's face changed, not with surprise, with exhaustion. No. You loved being the only person who knew which parts of Julian were yours. Lydia stepped into the aisle. You answered me before I knew who you were. You knew me. I knew the person you allowed me to imagine. Lydia stopped. For the first time that weekend, she seemed unable to find a version of the truth that protected her. Cora removed a second item from the black box. A letter. Gabriel had written it 6 days before he died. It was addressed to Lydia. He had discovered that she still retained access to the old account. He asked her to surrender the passwords and leave Cora alone. If she refused, he intended to tell the family everything. The original prank, the impersonation, the years of messages, the way Lydia had inserted herself into their marriage through a dead identity. The letter had never been sent. Lydia found it while helping arrange Gabriel's funeral. She took it. Cora learned about it months later when the solicitor reviewing Gabriel's files found the draft on his computer. That was why Lydia had returned to the Julian account, not because grief overwhelmed her, because she believed Gabriel had died before exposing her. She thought the secret belonged to her again. Cora unfolded a document beneath the letter. It was not a police report, not a lawsuit, not an ultimatum. It was Gabriel's final change to his will. He had left Lydia a single item, the old device containing the Julian account. Everything else went to Cora. Attached was one handwritten instruction. Let her keep the version of me she created. It is the only one she ever loved. Lydia read the sentence twice, then sat down. No one spoke. The rain softened against the chapel roof. Cora placed Gabriel's watch around her wrist. She had not invited the women to witness a wedding. She had invited them to witness an ending, not of her marriage. That had ended in a kitchen 11 months earlier. This was the burial of Julian Cross, the boy 4 girls invented, the man Gabriel was forced to inhabit, and the ghost Lydia kept resurrecting whenever reality refused to belong to her. Cora crossed to the fireplace set into the chapel wall. She placed the old photograph inside, then the printed messages, then the card bearing Julian's name. The paper caught slowly. Lydia stood, but she did not move forward. The face in the photograph darkened, curled, disappeared. Cora watched until nothing remained but ash. Then she turned to the women who had built him. You may leave now. Nina rose first. Tess followed. Amelia paused beside Cora as if searching for an apology large enough to survive 16 years. She found none. Lydia remained seated. Cora walked past her, without looking down. At the chapel doors, she stopped. Lydia's voice reached her from behind. "Was any of it mine?" Cora did not turn. Only the lie. Then she stepped into the rain.